My name is Aveline Marlowe, 32 years old. By 3:47 a.m., the bakery smelled like every good memory I'd ever had of my grandmother's kitchen. Vanilla warming in the air like a promise, butter singing in the oven, cinnamon unfurling in slow spirals, as if it remembered the shape of joy better than I did. I moved alone through the soft pool of light behind the counter, checking timers, steadying my hands over batter bowls, telling myself that nervous was just another word for ready. The glass cases were polished to a mirror brightness, the chalkboard menu was lettered in my neatest hand, and in the corner I'd framed a photograph of Grandma Eliza with her rolling pin, her eyes laughing at some private joke we never told the rest of the family. I'd named the bakery Sweet Gatherings because I wanted to build a place where birthdays and Tuesdays felt equally welcome. Today was the beginning. Today, finally, they would see. I had sent invitations on thick cream cardstock with a gold emboss that cost more than I should admit. I'd handwritten notes inside each one. To my father, James, the attorney who measured value in billable hours and winning streaks. To my mother, Diane, who scheduled love like a hospital rotation. To my brother, Tyler, who built his life out of spreadsheets and quarterly targets. And to my sister, Rosie, who could make a room tilt toward her with a single smile. I'd even named a few signature pastries for them. James's power scone with espresso and dark chocolate. Diane's Earl Grey cake with lavender buttercream. Tyler's Wall Street walnut brownies with cream cheese swirls, and Rosie's marketing maven macarons in bright, camera-ready colors. I told myself the names were a bridge, an invitation that tasted like olive branches. At 7:30, Annie from the flower shop next door appeared with her arms full of dahlias and eucalyptus. She set tiny vases on every table and tucked one stem into the jar by the register. "For luck," she said, then leaned in as if telling me a secret. "And for the right kind of people." I laughed, but something about her tone left a freckle of unease on my skin. Marcus from the bookstore across the street stuck his head in long enough to tape a handwritten sign to his window, "Go eat pastry, then buy a book." And he mimed a trumpet fanfare as he backed away. For a second, I let myself believe the morning would carry me like a river. 9 o'clock ticked into being. I flipped the placard to open, straightened my apron, and took a breath that tasted like sugar and hope. The bell above the door chimed, and the first customers stepped in. Neighbors, a couple with a stroller, a woman in running shoes who said she'd been watching the build-out for months and had been rooting for me. Their eyes went to the cases, and their voices softened with that reverent hush people get in museums and bakeries. "One of those, and two of these." "Oh, and what's that?" they asked. And I told them, and they bought, and they sat, and for a while my hands remembered the choreography of my dream. Pull espresso, plate tart, jot receipt, make change, smile, repeat. Between orders, I glanced at the door the way a dog listens for its name. I refreshed my phone more than was dignified. By 10:12, my group text to the family, "All set for opening. Hope to see you soon," showed 4 red receipts and no replies. I told myself court runs late, meetings happen, parking is a nightmare on Saturdays. By 11:03, the flow of customers slowed, which was normal for the hour, which was not a referendum on my worth, which was not proof of anything except that time is a stubborn river that doesn't care how wide your eyes are. I took a photo of the case for Instagram and tagged my family again, kidding in the caption about taste testing mandatory. The likes rolled in from friends and former coworkers and strangers who liked pretty food. From family, silence. At noon, I made the mistake of opening another app. My mother's page loaded first. Rosie stood beneath a silver banner that read, "Congratulations, Director." Her lipstick the exact color of a rose petal, and her arm looped through my father's as he lifted a flute of champagne. "So proud of our successful daughter," my mother's caption read. The whole family gathered to celebrate this incredible achievement. In the second photo, Tyler had flown in. Apparently, he stood next to Rosie, pointing at her with performative brotherly pride. In the third, my parents posed with the CEO in a ballroom that reflected snow-white tablecloths and the confidence of people who never hesitate to take up space. I scrolled and scrolled until the screen blurred, then set the phone face down as if I could suffocate the feeling by starving it of oxygen. A woman in a blazer told me my cinnamon roll was the best she'd ever had. I thanked her and wished her a perfect Saturday. The bell chimed again and again. Neighbors wandered in. A teenager snapped a photo of a lemon tart close enough to fog the glass. An old man sat by the window and read a folded newspaper with the meticulous patience of someone who refuses to be rushed by the century. I smiled until my cheeks ached because the bakery deserved that, because the customers deserved that, because I refused to let my family's absence be the whole story of my first day. But the pastries with their names sat untouched in the center of the case, their handwritten cards like place settings at a table nobody planned to join. By 3:18, I'd learned that time can feel like a stain that spreads even when no one is watching. By 4:52, I'd stopped pretending not to hear the quiet. By 5:27, the room thinned to a handful of late afternoon stragglers and the kind of sunlight that forgives everything it touches. I took the last tray of cookies from the oven and lined them up with a care that bordered on prayer. When the final customer left, I turned the sign to closed and locked the door with hands that did not feel as though they belonged to a triumphant business owner. The bakery looked like a stage after the audience has gone home. Chairs tucked, crumbs swept, flowers still trying their best. I slid down behind the counter and let my back find the cool of the refrigerator case. I didn't sob. I leaked, slow and steady, like a pipe with a hairline crack. The sound of the compressor humming took on the rhythm of a lullaby that made no promises. My phone buzzed, and for one feral second, hope leaped like a spark to dry tinder. The text was from my father. We need to discuss the bakery. No congratulations, no acknowledgement, just a line that sounded like a memo stapled to my heart. My mind performed a brief and brutal calculus. They had chosen a ballroom over my front door. They had crowned Rosie at noon. Now they wanted a meeting. The word discuss was a warning label, and the bakery, my bakery, felt suddenly like a company in receivership. I wiped my face with the hem of my apron and told myself a story about how people love in the languages they know, and how some languages can be indistinguishable from control if you squint. A soft knock sounded at the glass. Reflexively, I checked the time, 6:43, and shook my head at the locked door. The knock came again, followed by Annie's face appearing in a little rectangle of reflected streetlight, eyebrows raised in question. Behind her, Marcus balanced a paper-wrapped bundle under one arm, like a present, and made a goofy face that wrung an involuntary laugh out of me. I let them in, and they stepped across the threshold with the careful joy of people entering a church at midnight. "I brought champagne," Annie said, lifting the bottle as if toasting the ceiling. "Because first days deserve bubbles, not autopsies." "And I brought 3 mismatched glasses from the shop because I'm a man of aesthetic principles," Marcus added. "And because you can't drink champagne straight from the bottle unless you're in a French New Wave film or trying to forget a man named Philippe." We sat at the table nearest the photograph of my grandmother. The bubbles hissed like a promise too small to catch, and we raised our glasses over the map of crumbs that the day had left behind. Annie's shoulder pressed lightly to mine. The weight was ordinary and merciful, and said without words, "We're here, we're staying." "I thought they'd come," I heard myself admit in a voice that didn't feel like it belonged entirely to me. "Not for the whole day, just to say they saw it with their own eyes." "They will come," Marcus said, gentle and not entirely reassuring, "but for reasons that have everything to do with them and very little to do with you." Annie glanced toward the framed photo. "Sometimes the right people are the ones who wander in, because the door was open and something smelled like home." I looked at the untouched card that read James's Power Scone and felt something small and bright burn away at the edges. It wasn't anger exactly, more like the thin crispness of sugar caramelizing, a transformation under heat that couldn't be reversed. Outside, the street hummed in that soft early evening register. Inside, the bakery breathed around us, a living thing I had made with my hands and my stubbornness and 1,000 private vows. My phone face down on the table vibrated once and settled. I didn't turn it over. Tomorrow I would answer my father. I would pick the time and the place. I would let him believe, for a few more hours, that discuss was a neutral word. Tonight I would put the chairs up and wash the last bowls and take the flowers home so their petals wouldn't fall in the dark. Tonight I would pour the remaining champagne into a clean measuring cup and leave it by the sink like a dare to the morning. Annie tapped her glass against mine. "To sweet gatherings," she said. "To beginnings," Marcus added. "To the kind of family that shows up," I whispered. too soft for anyone but myself to hear. And then, because I wanted to remember this ache, this fragile joy, this clarity sharp as a knife warmed by a palm, I closed my eyes and memorized the sound of the refrigerator hum, the faint fizz of champagne, the echo of a bell that hadn't rung yet, but would, soon, for someone who came because the door was open. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a house where silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. My father, James Marlowe, built his reputation at Whitman and Associates, a law firm that liked to remind the city it was one of the most prestigious in the Pacific Northwest. Corporate law was his blood sport. He worked 80-hour weeks and missed school plays, birthdays, Sunday dinners, but he never failed to remind us his sacrifices kept us clothed, fed, and positioned exactly where society should notice us. His voice carried the sharp edge of closing arguments even at the breakfast table. My mother, Diane, managed a hospital and our household with the same surgical efficiency. She color-coded calendars, dictated chores with clinical precision, and hosted charity events with a smile that was equal parts warmth and assessment. Everything in our lives was measurable. Accomplishments meant leverage, something she could place on a resume of the family itself. My siblings absorbed this language of achievement fluently. Tyler, the eldest, was a prodigy in finance. By 25, he was an investment banker in New York, sending sleek gifts that screamed expense but not intimacy. He flew in for holidays the way a CEO might drop by a shareholder meeting. Polished, distracted, already gone before you finished your sentence. Rosie, the youngest, inherited our mother's charisma and our father's ambition. At 29, she was already a marketing director at Tech Fusion, a company that thrived on beanbag chairs, cold brew taps, and Instagrammable office culture. Every new perk she flaunted online was another jewel in our parents' crown of pride. And then there was me, middle child, the one with flour perpetually smudged into my cuticles, daydreaming recipes instead of resume lines. The family ledger kept me penciled in under hobbyist, a column for indulgences that didn't translate to prestige. My refuge was Grandma Eliza's kitchen, a small, sunlit space on the edge of town, smelling of nutmeg and safety. She taught me that dough wasn't just chemistry, it was alive, a rhythm you could feel in your palms. Baking is love made visible, she'd tell me, guiding my little hands over cinnamon rolls. Her words didn't just lodge in me, they rooted, spread, defined the soil I grew from. While Tyler won debate tournaments and Rosie collected marketing awards, I collected recipes in a spiral notebook with grease stains and chocolate fingerprints. At bake sales, my goods disappeared first, but at home, my mother pursed her lips. It's a nice hobby, Aveline, but focus on things that matter for college applications. Hobby. Always that word, dressed like encouragement, but sharpened like dismissal. By junior year, I was working part-time at Bailey's Bake Shop. Mrs. Adelaide Bailey became my second mentor, watching me decorate wedding cakes with an attention that felt like belief. You have magic in your hands, she told me once, pressing a piping bag into my palm. Don't let anyone tell you this is just a hobby. If Grandma taught me the heart of baking, Mrs. Bailey taught me its bones, the profit margins, the costs hidden in every pastry case, the customer service that turned purchases into loyalty. College application season was a war I couldn't win outright. My parents pushed pre-med programs, arguing that my knack for chemistry could morph into a stable, noble career. I compromised with a business major and food science minor, pretending it was for them, knowing it was for me. Then, sophomore year, Grandma died. Her will surprised everyone. She left Tyler nothing but a handwritten letter about ambition. Rosie got a necklace she'd once admired. To me, she left a modest savings account with a note scrawled in her unsteady hand. To Aveline, who understands the most important ingredients are passion and love. It wasn't enough to open a bakery immediately, but it was seed money. More than that, it was a vote of confidence I could tuck in my pocket whenever doubt crept in. After graduation, my peers landed salaries and benefits. I collected shifts, barista at dawn, office assistant by day, freelance cake orders by night. Rent went to a sliver of an apartment where the oven rattled but worked. My family referred to it as my finding myself period. My father would slip law school brochures across the holiday table. My mother mentioned hospital management training programs, casual as knives left out on the counter. Tyler emailed me networking opportunities in finance. Rosie offered me brand advice, with a smile sharp enough to cut fondant. Still, my vision thickened into clarity. I didn't want just a bakery. I wanted sweet gatherings, a space humming with conversation, neighbors turning into friends, seasonal pastries anchoring family traditions, a corner where people could feel less alone. A place where the glass cases didn't just display desserts, they displayed proof that love had a texture. 7 years. That's how long I worked and saved. 7 years of spreadsheets no one but me cared about, of recipes tweaked in midnight kitchens, of walking past empty storefronts and imagining them filled with the smell of bread. 7 years of being told this was a phase. When I finally found the corner location, brick walls scarred but beautiful, tall windows spilling light across old wood floors, I knew. It wasn't perfect, but it was possible. Thanks to Grandma's savings and my relentless scrimping, it was mine. I remember dialing my family, trembling as if excitement were a language I wasn't fluent in. My father's response, "A retail lease in this economy? Send me the paperwork before you sign anything. Better yet, let me invest. Guide it properly." His tone said guide, but meant control. My mother sighed. "The restaurant industry has such a high failure rate, darling. It's not too late for grad school. The hospital's program is still accepting applications." Rosie's voice sparkled like tinfoil. "Wow, you're actually going through with the baking thing. So brave. I'd never risk financial security for a passion project. But hey, that's what makes you you, right?" Tyler didn't bother with pleasantries. "Send me a business plan and 5-year projections. Did you account for first-year losses?" Their words weren't daggers. Daggers at least acknowledge you're bleeding. Their words were spreadsheets, risk assessments, polite detours around the fact that they couldn't be proud. And yet, every night as I stripped paint from brick, sanded wood floors, negotiated permits, I felt alive. Annie stopped by with coffee and laughter, Marcus with marketing tips, scribbled on bookmarks. "This neighborhood's changing," Annie said once, perched on an upside-down paint bucket. "Businesses like yours will be the heart of it." By the time I framed Grandma's photo and placed her rolling pin on a shelf, the space finally felt like what I'd been building inside me all along. A bakery, yes, but more than that, a declaration. And then the call from Rosie. Her voice squealed through the line. "I got promoted. Senior marketing director. Huge party next Saturday. Everyone will be there. You'll come, right?" My heart cracked in the quiet space between her words. The party fell on the exact day of my grand opening. Before I could form a response, text buzzed in. "So proud of Rosie," from Mom. "Family dinner after her party. Table for 5, from Dad." 5. As if my bakery didn't exist. As if I hadn't spent years turning pennies into plaster and sugar into a dream. I reminded them of the conflict. Mom's reply was swift. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement for your sister." Dad chimed in. "You can have a soft opening another day." It wasn't just dismissal, it was confirmation. In the family ledger, Rosie's lines soared in gold ink. Mine remained penciled in, erasable. But I didn't cancel. I couldn't. Instead, I polished glass cases until my reflection blurred and whispered to the walls, "You deserve to be seen, even if they won't look." Despite the texts, despite the certainty in my parents' voices that Rosie's promotion was the only event worth orbiting, I poured myself into the final week of preparations. The bakery needed me more than my wounded pride. If I faltered now, it would confirm their prophecy that this was just a phase. I would not hand them that satisfaction. Every morning started at 4 a.m. with dough rising in lined trays, the yeast breathing out quiet hope into the kitchen. By noon, I was sanding down shelves or scrubbing paint flecks off my forearms. By midnight, I was tweaking recipes in notebooks spattered with butter stains. Sleep shrank into a polite suggestion, but adrenaline kept my body upright. The night before opening, I stood in the center of the finished space. The brick walls gleamed in warm light, the refinished wood floors reflected a soft glow, and the cases stood empty but expectant, like lungs about to inhale. On one wall, Grandma's corner waited, her framed photo, handwritten recipe cards, and her rolling pin, polished, displayed like a relic. My throat tightened. She should have been here, flower on her cheek, hands on her hips, laughing at me for fussing. Instead, she lived in that corner, reminding me silently that love was visible in the work we leave behind. I sent a final text to the family. Tomorrow's the day. Doors open at 9. Pastries with your names on them are waiting. No reply. At 3:30 a.m. on opening day, I jolted awake before the alarm. My body knew this was the morning everything tilted. The air outside was damp, the kind of Portland chill that clung to your lungs. Inside, the bakery filled with warmth as ovens ignited, trays slid in, timers ticked. Vanilla, cinnamon, lemon zest. Each smell was a chorus line singing the prologue of my new life. By 7:30, Annie bustled in, carrying vases filled with white tulips and yellow daisies. She set them on tables with a flair that made the room feel like a celebration instead of a risk. "On the house," she said, squeezing my hand. "First days deserve flowers." At 8:00, Marcus from the bookstore arrived, his arms full of a gift wrapped in brown paper and twine. "Business warming," he said, placing it on the counter. "Open later. Too much pressure if you open it now." His grin was lopsided, reassuring. I checked my phone again. Still nothing from family. I tried not to notice. At 8:59, I flipped the sign to open. The bell above the door chimed immediately, and a stream of neighbors filed in. A couple with a stroller, an older woman with a cane, 2 teenagers who squealed at the macarons. Their faces lit up at the sight of the cases, their voices hushed with reverence. "This cinnamon roll smells like heaven," one customer said, closing her eyes as she bit into it. "These brownies remind me of New York," another man laughed, holding Tyler's Wall Street brownies without knowing the name. For a while I floated. The rhythm of service carried me. Pour coffee, ring up sales, answer questions. The bakery was alive, buzzing, the way I'd dreamed. But each time the bell rang, I looked up, hoping it would be them. Each time my phone buzzed, I prayed for a message. None came. At 11:30, after a rush, I found a moment to breathe and check my phone again. My stomach sank. Social media had bloomed with photos from Rosie's party. There was Dad, raising a glass in a ballroom, face flushed with pride. Mom, arranging a banner that read, "Congratulations, Director Rosie." Tyler, who'd sworn he couldn't get away from meetings, grinning at Rosie's side, arms slung around her shoulder. The caption under Mom's post gutted me. So proud of our successful daughter. The whole family gathered to celebrate this incredible achievement. The whole family, except me. My chest tightened. I turned my phone face down on the counter, but the images burned behind my eyelids. At 2 a.m., Lucy Chen from the Neighborhood Chronicle arrived, notebook in hand. She asked thoughtful questions, her eyes flicking toward the untouched pastries with name cards in front of them. "Family couldn't make it?" she asked gently. I hesitated. A lie perched on my tongue, but the truth came out instead. They had another commitment. Her eyes softened. She shifted her questions toward my passion for community, for baking. Her kindness nearly cracked my professional mask. I smiled until my cheeks ached, holding myself together by threads. By 5:00, customers dwindled. The cases still held most of the family-inspired pastries, their name cards now cruel reminders of who hadn't walked through the door. The flowers on the tables leaned in tiredly, their stems bowing under the weight of the day. At 6:45, just before closing, my phone buzzed. My father. "We need to discuss the bakery." No congratulations, no apology, no acknowledgement, just business. The dam broke. I turned the sign to closed, locked the door, and let the sobs come, raw and uncontrollable, my back pressed against the counter as if the wood could hold me together. The knock startled me, soft, hesitant. I wiped my face and glanced up. Annie and Marcus stood outside, peering through the glass with concern. Annie lifted a bottle of champagne. Marcus held 3 mismatched glasses. I let them in. "We thought you might need friends tonight," Annie said, her voice warm as the oven still cooling behind me. "Whether it was perfect or not, first days deserve to be toasted," Marcus added. We sat at a table, glasses clinking. Annie's shoulder brushed mine. Marcus cracked jokes until laughter broke through my tears. For the first time that day, I felt the truth rise like yeast in warm water. Maybe the family I needed wasn't the one bound to me by blood. Maybe it was the one who showed up when the doors opened and the room was empty. Still, the words of my father's text pulsed like a bruise. "We need to discuss the bakery." Discuss, not celebrate, not honor. Discuss. I had no idea then just how much weight those words carried. The morning after my grand opening, I woke at 5 o'clock a.m. to the sound of rain hissing against the windows. Portland rain, steady, unhurried, indifferent. I dressed in silence, poured myself coffee, and walked to the bakery with a resolve that felt both brittle and stubborn. I wasn't going to let yesterday define me. Customers had come, neighbors had cheered, and the smell of cinnamon had filled the air. That mattered. But when I unlocked the bakery door and stepped inside, the shadows felt different. The cases gleamed, the flowers Annie had left still tried their best, but the room carried an echo of emptiness. My father's text sat heavy in my mind. We need to discuss the bakery. Those words weren't congratulation, they were summons. At 7:30, while I kneaded dough with sleeves rolled up, the bells over the door jingled. My first thought was that I'd forgotten to lock it again. Sorry, I called over my shoulder. We don't open for another 30 minutes. A voice answered, crisp as a verdict. That is apparent from the empty tables. My hands froze. I turned. There they were. My father first. Leather portfolio tucked beneath his arm, suit pressed sharp enough to cut. My mother next, eyes sweeping the bakery like she was inspecting a new hospital wing. Behind them came Rosie, swinging a designer bag, sunglasses perched on her head despite the gray sky. And on a tablet she held up, Tyler's face appeared, video calling from New York. What are you doing here? I asked, wiping flour from my palms onto my apron. Family meeting, Dad announced, choosing the largest table and gesturing for everyone to sit. We need to discuss the bakery situation. I glanced at the clock. We open in 30 minutes. I have work to do. Mom's smile was sympathetic, her words slicing anyway. Based on what we observed yesterday, I doubt you'll be overwhelmed with business. My jaw tightened. You observed? None of you were here. Social media exists for a reason, Rosie quipped, tapping her phone. Your geotags weren't exactly breaking the internet. From the tablet, Tyler's voice chimed in. I reviewed the neighborhood demographics. Foot traffic is weak. Specialty food businesses in areas like this usually close within 6 months. My heart pounded. They hadn't just ignored my opening. They had been watching it like analysts circling a failing stock. Dad opened his portfolio and slid a stack of papers across the table. We've been discussing your situation, and we believe we have a solution that will minimize damage. I didn't move. My situation? Mom leaned forward, voice lowering to her gentlest tone, the one she used when delivering bad news to patients. We all understand the appeal of chasing a dream, sweetheart, but sometimes dreams need adjusting. We can help you sell this place before you lose everything. Dad tapped the documents. A real estate agent is ready to list it. You could walk away with minimal losses. I picked up the papers. My stomach turned. They weren't blank forms. They were pre-filled agreements. My bakery was already halfway to being erased. Mom reached into her purse and placed more papers on the table. I took the liberty of filling out medical school applications. Your grades were strong. With the right essay, you could begin this fall. Tyler's voice was flat. My projections show insolvency within 4 months. 6, if you cut costs. But then quality drops and failure accelerates. Rosie, snapping a few photos of the bakery with her phone, finally looked up. I even convinced my boss to open an entry-level spot for you in marketing. Pay isn't great, but with my referral, you'll climb quickly. They spoke over one another, outlining solutions, dismantling my dream piece by piece, reducing 7 years of work into a problem that required intervention. My bakery wasn't a place to them. It was an error to correct. I couldn't breathe. The bell jingled again. Mrs. Bailey walked in carrying a gift basket wrapped in cellophane. She stopped short at the sight of my family crowding the table. Aveline, dear, I came to congratulate you on your opening. Is this your family? Dad barely looked up. We're in the middle of a private discussion. Mrs. Bailey's smile didn't waver. I'm Adelaide Bailey, owner of Bailey's Bake Shops. We've expanded to 5 locations now. She extended her hand, and suddenly Dad was interested. He shook it, eyes narrowing with recognition of success. I've known Aveline since she was 16, she continued, setting the basket on the counter. She's exceptional, one of the best bakers I've ever trained. I have complete faith in her success. The air shifted. Mom straightened in her chair. Rosie lowered her phone. Even Tyler's pixelated face leaned closer on the tablet. 5 locations, Dad repeated. Indeed, Mrs. Bailey said smoothly. And Aveline is ahead of where I was at her age. She's not just talented, she understands business. She turned to me with warmth that nearly undid me. I'm sorry I missed your opening. My flight from the baking conference was delayed, but I wouldn't have missed coming to see this for anything. Her presence cut through the fog like sunlight. The contrast was brutal. Her regret at missing one day versus my family's decision to miss it entirely. I faced them. Why didn't any of you come yesterday? Silence. A silence that thickened, heavy, and telling. Finally, Mom spoke. We told you about Rosie's promotion party. It was a conflict we couldn't avoid. The company CEO was there, Rosie added. It was career-defining. The party started at noon, I snapped. My opening began at 9. You could have come for 30 minutes. One of you. Any of you. More silence. My heart hammered. Just tell me the truth. Why wasn't my bakery worth even a brief appearance? It was Tyler, distant on a screen, who finally said it. We discussed it and decided attending Rosie's event sent the right message about what achievements this family values. The words landed like a punch. My breath caught. You discussed it? All of you? Mom's chin lifted defensively. Real achievements deserve real celebrations, Aveline. And mine isn't? I gestured around the bakery, my voice rising. I worked 3 jobs for 7 years. I built this from nothing. How is that not an achievement? Dad's tone was patronizing, final. Let's be realistic. A small bakery isn't comparable to becoming the youngest director in a Fortune 500 company. We're trying to help you before this mistake destroys you. He tapped the listing papers. You have 2 choices. Sign these and let us extract you gracefully, or continue without our support. The ultimatum hung in the air. Mrs. Bailey stepped forward, resting a hand on my shoulder. Her eyes met mine with steady pride. Behind her, I saw the first customers of the day peering through the window, waiting. I drew a breath. My hands stopped shaking. You need to leave, now. Dad's voice hardened. Aveline, no. The word rang sharper than I expected. For my entire life, you've treated my passion as a phase, a hobby, a mistake. Not one of you showed up for me, and now you barge in with plans to dismantle my dream before it's had a chance to breathe. I don't want your help, not like this. I walked to the door and held it open. Please leave. Customers are waiting. One by one, they gathered their papers. Shock on Mom's face. Anger in Dad's. Rosie muttering something under her breath. Tyler pixelated and frowning. As Dad passed me, he paused. His voice dropped. Dangerous. This conversation isn't over. When you're ready to be reasonable, call us. The bell jingled as they left. I turned to welcome my first customers, forcing a smile that trembled but held. My chest burned. My throat ached. But beneath the ache was something else, a spark. For the first time, I had said no. The week that followed felt like walking through fog with bricks tied to my ankles. Outwardly, I kept the bakery running, unlocking the doors at 9 a.m., arranging pastries, greeting customers with practiced warmth. But inside, my energy thinned like dough rolled too many times. Their words replayed in my mind in an endless loop. Real achievements deserve real celebrations. Sign these papers. Extract yourself gracefully. Each morning I woke before dawn, yet I moved like someone already defeated. The pastries were still good, technically correct, customers said, but I knew. They lacked something. That spark of joy that had once flavored every bite had bled out of me. Baking had always been my sanctuary, my rebellion, my love letter to the world. Now, every batch felt like evidence for the prosecution in a trial I hadn't agreed to. Annie noticed first. She stopped by daily, sometimes with sandwiches, sometimes with nothing but her presence. You're going through the motions, she said one slow afternoon, brushing crumbs into her palm. Customers feel it. They can taste when love is missing. Marcus developed a habit of showing up with coffee at 4 p.m, helping me wipe tables or restock napkins. He didn't say much, but his presence reminded me of something vital, that not everyone walked away when things got heavy. My family, meanwhile, hadn't eased their campaign. Dad's texts came daily. The real estate agent is ready when you are. Call me before market dips further. Mom forwarded emails about medical school orientations. Just keeping your options open, dear. Rosie's social media glittered with coded barbs. Hashtags like hatch failing forward. Captions about knowing when to pivot. Tyler emailed spreadsheets with projections so grim I almost deleted them unopened. 4 months, he wrote once. That's generous. The deepest cut came from a cousin who stopped by for a latte one morning. We wanted to come to your opening, she said awkwardly. But your mom mentioned you were figuring things out and preferred space. My throat went dry. They hadn't just abandoned me, they'd discouraged others from supporting me. Nights became the hardest. I'd drag myself home, collapse on the couch, and stare at the ceiling until sleep crept in like an unwelcome guest. My apartment smelled faintly of butter and fatigue, but not joy. The bakery wasn't failing outright, it limped forward, but my heart was fracturing under the weight of their disdain. 2 weeks after opening, while reorganizing a storage cabinet, I found a box I'd forgotten. Inside, Grandma Eliza's recipe journal, bound in worn leather, corners softened by time. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her handwriting spilled across the pages, margin notes, crossed out measurements, tiny hearts beside favorite recipes. And then an envelope slipped free, my name on it, written in her shaky script. My chest constricted. She must have tucked it here before she died, knowing I'd find it when the time was right. With fingers shaking, I tore it open. My dearest Aveline, it began, if you are reading this, it means you found the courage to open your bakery. I always knew you would. From the first time your little hands pressed dough beside mine, I saw a gift in you, not just for baking, but for understanding how food carries joy and binds people together. Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest, inhaling the faint scent of old paper and cinnamon that seemed to linger. Your parents and siblings may never understand your passion. They measure success by society's standards. You measure it by the happiness you create. Neither is wrong, simply different. But never doubt, your path is valid and it matters. The world needs nurturers as much as it needs executives. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. My breath hitched. I read on. Remember, sweet girl, success is not measured by recognition, but by the fulfillment you find in your work and the lives you touch with your gifts. My greatest joy was watching you discover your passion. My greatest hope is that you will hold on to it, even when others cannot see its worth. At the bottom, a postscript. The true secret ingredient in any recipe is love, and no one understands this better than you. The dam broke. I sank to the floor of the storage room, clutching the letter, sobbing until my chest hurt. But these tears weren't only grief. They were release. A different kind of fire lit inside me. She had known. She had always known. The next morning, I rose before dawn with something new in my chest. Clarity. I preheated the ovens, not to fill orders, but to create. Not pastries tied to family names. Not desperate olive branches baked in butter and sugar. This time, it would be mine. I developed a lemon lavender shortbread that captured the quiet elegance I loved. I perfected a dark chocolate cherry sourdough that balanced bitterness with sweetness. I rolled out rustic fruit galettes, messy in appearance but rich in flavor, each bite a reminder that imperfection could still be extraordinary. When Annie walked in that afternoon, she stopped short. "The light is back in your eyes, she said softly. "What happened?" I showed her the letter. She read silently, her fingers brushing the paper as if it were fragile. When she looked up, her eyes glistened. "That's it, isn't it? You've been trying to prove yourself to the wrong people. Time to bake for the right ones." Marcus arrived just then with his usual coffee and overheard. "Then let's make them notice," he said. "Not your family, the neighborhood. All of us newcomers are struggling. What if we create something together? An event, a community gathering. Your bakery could be the heart of it." The idea pulsed alive in the room. For the first time since my opening day, hope didn't feel naive. It felt like strategy. The idea of a community event grew roots faster than I expected. At first, it was just Annie, Marcus, and me, huddled around a table in the bakery, sketching plans on the backs of order sheets. But soon it began to spread, the way yeast turns water and flour into something that rises. Annie said she could host a flower arranging demo. Marcus offered readings from local authors in his shop. "We could call it a neighborhood gathering," he suggested, eyes bright. "Your bakery will be the anchor." For the first time in weeks, my pulse raced with something other than dread. I posted about the idea on my bakery's page, tagging nearby businesses. The response stunned me. The vintage clothing boutique wanted to hold a small fashion show. The craft brewery promised to brew a special pale ale to pair with my pastries. Even the yoga studio down the block offered free mini sessions in the park. What had begun as a fragile suggestion was turning into a full-fledged festival. Lucy Chen, the neighborhood reporter who had interviewed me on opening day, called after seeing my post. "This is exactly the kind of collaboration our readers love," she said. "I'll write a feature piece. With the right push, it won't just draw the neighborhood, it could attract people from across the city." Her words lit a fuse. For the first time, the bakery wasn't a solitary dream. It was a thread in a larger tapestry. I began working with new purpose, testing recipes that felt truer to me than anything I'd made before. Gone were the pastries named after family members that had sat unsold in the case like unanswered letters. In their place bloomed desserts that told my story. The centerpiece was something I called Eliza's Legacy, a cinnamon roll filled with apple compote and draped in brown butter glaze, a marriage of my grandmother's two favorite recipes. I placed it in the center of the case with a card that read simply, "For the woman who taught me that love is visible." Annie cried when she tasted it. Marcus asked for a dozen for his bookstore event. I felt my chest expand in a way it hadn't since before my family walked into the bakery with papers meant to erase me. The days leading up to the event blurred into a frenzy of preparation. I baked until my hands ached, ordered supplies in bulk, scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. Annie strung garlands of flowers across the front windows. Marcus set up a chalkboard out front that read, "Sweet Gatherings belongs to everyone who walks through these doors." The night before the event, I sat alone in the bakery, exhausted but alive. The cases were stocked, the tables set, the air rich with sugar and spice. My phone buzzed with another text from Dad. "Market is heating up. Strong time to sell before values drop. Call me." I didn't reply. For the first time, his words slid off me like water. The morning of the event dawned clear and golden, the kind of autumn day that smelled of wood smoke and possibility. By 8:30, a line had already formed outside the bakery. I peeked through the curtains, heart pounding. Families with children, couples holding hands, elderly neighbors leaning on canes, strangers who had driven across town. They were here, for me, for us. At 9 o'clock sharp, I unlocked the doors. The bell jingled, and the bakery filled with bodies and laughter and voices. Within minutes, the case was half empty. Eliza's Legacy sold out before I could even snap a photo. Customers sat elbow to elbow at tables, strangers striking up conversations over pastries. By noon, the entire block buzzed with energy. Annie's flower workshop spilled out onto the sidewalk. Marcus's book cart was surrounded by people trading novels. The brewery's special ale foamed into glasses at a makeshift stand. I moved through it all, apron dusted with flour, cheeks aching from smiling, pulse thrumming with disbelief. Lucy arrived with a photographer, scribbling notes. "This is more than a bakery story," she said, gesturing to the crowd. "This is a neighborhood rebirth." Halfway through the day, Mrs. Bailey appeared, accompanied by 3 women she introduced as former employees who now ran their own bakeries. "We've formed a mentorship network," she said, hugging me tightly. "We'd like you to join us." As if that weren't enough, Lucy later brought over the owner of Riverfront, one of the city's most acclaimed farm-to-table restaurants. He sampled my chocolate cherry sourdough and said, "We've been searching for a bakery partner. Your flavor profiles are perfect. Let's talk supply contracts." And then, a woman with a professional camera introduced herself as part of the city's small business grant committee. "We fund neighborhood revitalization projects," she explained. "Your collaborative approach is exactly what we look for. I'll send you application details." By 5 p.m., I had sold every pastry. The register was stuffed with receipts. My feet ached, my arms trembled, but my heart felt fuller than it ever had. As the sun dipped low, I finally checked my phone. Notifications flooded the screen. Photos of the festival had gone viral locally. The hashtag #SweetGatherings was trending. Food bloggers were sharing my pastries, and among the messages, one stood out. From Dad, "Saw coverage of your event. Congratulations on turnout. Available to discuss growth strategies if you'd like." Then Mom, "The bakery looked lovely online. You always had an eye for presentation." Rosie, "Your social media engagement is impressive. My team even discussed it today." Tyler, "Wholesale accounts provide stability. The restaurant connection could scale well. I'll send analysis." They spoke the only language they understood: metrics, strategy, optics, respect couched in the vocabulary of business. No apology, no admission, but acknowledgement, however grudging. I typed polite replies, nothing more. I no longer needed their approval. That night, as I locked the bakery, I pressed my palm against the cool glass of the door. Outside, the street glowed with the echo of laughter. Inside, the air still carried cinnamon and something brighter, hope. I whispered to myself, "This is mine. Finally, this is mine." Weeks passed, and Sweet Gatherings no longer felt like a fragile experiment. It felt alive. Customers returned, not just for pastries, but for the comfort of routine. The retired teacher who ordered Earl Grey cake every Thursday, the young couple who came every Sunday morning after their run, the teenager who brought friends to split lemon lavender shortbread. Names and faces became familiar, and in that familiarity, I found a quiet, steady joy. The partnership with Riverfront Restaurant gave me reliable wholesale orders: breads, sourdoughs, chocolate torts. For the first time since opening, I wasn't scraping by. The Small Business Grant Committee invited me to submit a proposal, and their interest alone was enough to shift my self-image. I wasn't someone begging for permission to dream. I was someone building something others wanted to support. My social media presence shifted too. No longer carefully staged photos of pastries in perfect light. Now I posted stories about burnt batches, behind-the-scenes flour fights, customers laughing at tables. The honesty resonated. Comments flooded in from people who said they wanted to visit not just for the food, but for the feeling. And slowly my family began to reappear. It started with Dad. One Tuesday morning, he walked in alone, suit jacket over his arm, scanning the bakery like he was evaluating a new case. He didn't ask to sit. He ordered a black coffee and a James's Power scone, the very pastry I'd once named after him. He ate it in silence, eyes thoughtful. When he left, he paused at the counter. "You've built something functional here," he said, his version of high praise. A week later, Mom arrived with 2 colleagues from the hospital board. She introduced me as her daughter, the bakery owner. Her voice carried something new: pride. Genuine, tentative pride. One of her friends asked if we catered. Mom glanced at me expectantly, waiting for me to answer. Rosie followed in her own way. She stopped by on a Sunday, sunglasses perched on her head, phone in hand. "Your engagement metrics are impressive," she said, scrolling through my page. Then, softer, almost embarrassed, "I think I've been competing with you since we were kids. Maybe we could just be sisters instead of rivals." Tyler was last. He flew in from New York, spreadsheets in hand as always, but his tone was different. "Your numbers defy industry projections," he admitted, shaking his head. "I didn't account for community investment as a variable. There are lessons here." He didn't sound patronizing. He sounded curious. I welcomed their visits, but cautiously. Boundaries became my shield. I made it clear my bakery was not a case to be argued, a resume to be critiqued, or a problem to be solved. Respectful engagement was welcome. Attempts to control were not. To my surprise, they listened. Not perfectly, not always, but enough. Meanwhile, Sweet Gatherings continued to grow. The grant was approved, funding a kitchen expansion and outdoor seating. I hired my first employee, Jessica, a culinary school graduate who shared my belief that baking was about connection as much as craft. With her help, I could focus on bigger ideas. One of those ideas became Chosen Family Sundays. Once a month, I closed the bakery to regular sales and opened it instead for a shared meal. I baked bread and desserts, and attendees brought dishes to share. Strangers sat at communal tables, breaking bread together, telling stories, laughing. The bakery transformed into what I had always dreamed, a place where people belonged. Annie and Marcus became my inner circle, my chosen siblings. We met weekly to share victories and struggles. Annie's flower shop hosted a wedding showcase that featured my desserts. Marcus's bookstore added a cafe corner stocked with my pastries. Together, we created a network of support that no criticism could dismantle. Mrs. Bailey invited me into her mentorship group. Over coffee with women who had built thriving bakeries of their own, I learned lessons no textbook could teach: how to handle supplier negotiations, how to expand without losing soul, how to say no when growth threatened to swallow joy. 6 months after the community event, Sweet Gatherings was more than stable. It was thriving. Profitable weeks turned into profitable months. The bakery was featured in a national article about community-centered businesses revitalizing neighborhoods. The writer concluded, "Marlo has built more than a bakery. She has built belonging." On the bakery's first anniversary, I hosted a celebration. Customers filled the space, their laughter spilling onto the sidewalk. Annie brought armfuls of sunflowers. Marcus gave a reading from a new novel. Mrs. Bailey clinked glasses with me, her eyes shining. And my family came too, not as honored guests, not at the center, but simply as people among many. Dad ordered another power scone without comment. Mom introduced me to a friend as my daughter, the baker who's changing this neighborhood. Rosie took photos for her social media, but also washed dishes when the sink piled high. Tyler asked thoughtful questions about wholesale accounts, not as judgment, but as respect. As the evening wound down, I stood near the photo of Grandma Eliza. The bakery glowed around me, candles on tables, crumbs on plates, voices weaving together. Sweet Gatherings had become exactly what its name promised. And for the first time, I realized something profound. My family's absence that first day, their attempts to erase my dream, hadn't destroyed me. They had pushed me to find strength deeper than their approval. Without their rejection, I might never have discovered my own definition of success. Sometimes the people meant to love you will fail to see your worth, but sometimes that failure is the fire that forges your own. As I blew out the single candle on the anniversary cake, I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma. You were right. Love made visible." The bakery hummed around me, alive, full, and mine. The months after the anniversary celebration unfolded like chapters I hadn't dared to imagine. Sweet Gatherings was no longer just a bakery. It had become a landmark, a place whispered about in guidebooks and tagged in travel blogs. People didn't just come for pastries. They came for the feeling, the warmth of wooden tables, the scent of cinnamon that lingered in their coats, the sense that for a few minutes they belonged to something larger than themselves. Eliza's Corner, the nook I had dedicated to my grandmother, became the bakery's heart. Her photograph, the rolling pin, and her recipe cards drew people in. Some came to read them quietly, others to share their own family food stories. Children asked about the lady in the picture, and when I told them she had taught me how to bake, their eyes widened as though they'd just met a legend. On Thursdays, I held free baking classes for neighborhood kids, passing along the same lessons Eliza gave me. Knead with your hands, taste with your heart, never skimp on love. Chosen Family Sundays grew into something bigger than I'd dreamed. The first few were small, maybe a dozen people passing dishes at 2 tables. By spring, the bakery overflowed, and we moved extra seating outside. Dishes ranged from homemade tamales to vegan curries to lasagna, baked in battered pans carried straight from neighbors' ovens. Strangers sat down together, left as friends, and often came back the next month with a new recipe in hand. One Sunday evening, as we cleared plates, Annie leaned against the counter, her hands still smelling of lilies. "Do you realize what you've built?" she asked, gesturing toward the crowded tables where laughter still lingered. "This isn't just food, this is family, for people who thought they didn't have one." Her words sank into me like yeast blooming in warm water. For so long, I had chased validation from the family I was born into. And here, quietly, I had built another family. One that showed up. One that stayed. My biological family kept circling at the edges. Dad would stop in occasionally, always dressed for court, always ordering the power scone. He never praised openly, but I noticed the way he lingered a little longer each time, as if studying the place with reluctant respect. Once, after biting into the scone, he murmured, "Not bad," which from him felt like a coronation. Mom began bringing her hospital board colleagues more frequently, dropping hints that my bakery had become her favorite spot for luncheons. Her voice softened when she introduced me, not as my daughter trying out a bakery, but simply my daughter, the baker. It was subtle, but in our family's language, it was everything. Rosie surprised me most. One evening after closing, she appeared unannounced, heels in her hand, exhaustion etched into her face. "I just needed somewhere quiet," she said. We sat at a table with mugs of chamomile tea, and for the first time since childhood, we talked without competition, buzzing beneath our words. She admitted she envied the simplicity of what I'd built. "My life looks shiny online, but most days I feel hollow," she whispered. For once, I didn't hear arrogance in her voice, only longing. And Tyler, ever the numbers man, emailed me one day with a spreadsheet labeled Community Investment Metrics. "I've been studying your model," he said on a call later. "You're proving something traditional business schools ignore. People aren't just buying products, they're buying connection." His voice carried awe instead of doubt. For my brother, that was transformation. Yet even as their respect grew, I guarded my boundaries. I no longer bent myself to fit their definitions of success. If they wanted to be part of my life, they had to meet me where I stood, among flour bags and rolling pins, not law offices or boardrooms. To my surprise, they seemed willing. The bakery itself continued to thrive. The grant funded new ovens, bigger prep tables, and a second display case. I hired 2 more employees, giving me time to focus on recipe development and community programming. A food blogger from San Francisco wrote an article calling Sweet Gatherings, a template for neighborhood revival in an age of digital isolation. Within weeks, customers were driving from out of state just to taste Eliza's legacy. But the moment that crystallized it all came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was teaching a group of children how to braid challah. One girl, her hair in messy pigtails, her hands dusted with flour, looked up at me and said, "When I grow up, I want to have a bakery like yours. Not big, just happy." Her words broke something in me and healed it all at once. That night, as I locked up, I paused by Eliza's corner. The bakery hummed with the echoes of the day, laughter, footsteps, the faint smell of sugar. I touched her rolling pin, whispering, "You were right, Grandma. Love made visible." I realized then that the story I had been telling myself all along, that I wasn't enough, that I needed my family's approval, was never true. Their absence on my opening day had been painful, yes, but it had also been a gift. It forced me to find strength in my own hands, to build something no one could take from me. On the bakery's second spring, as sun streamed through the tall windows, I looked around at the crowded tables, at Annie laughing with Marcus, at customers passing plates like family, and I understood. I hadn't just opened a bakery. I had created a sanctuary. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. A year after Sweet Gatherings first opened its doors, the bakery felt less like a shop and more like a living organism, breathing, shifting, pulsing with the rhythms of the community. By then, I had stopped waiting for validation. I no longer checked my phone during slow hours, hoping for a text from my parents. I didn't stalk Rosie's social media, tallying likes that would never be mine. My measure of success was written in the flour-dusted smiles of customers, in the warmth of strangers who lingered until closing, in the hush that fell whenever someone bit into a pastry and closed their eyes. For the bakery's first anniversary, we hosted a celebration that spilled out onto the sidewalk. Strings of lights crisscrossed above, Annie filled the room with sunflowers, Marcus organized a small book exchange, and Mrs. Bailey stood proudly at my side, telling anyone who would listen that she'd always known I would make it. My staff, Jessica and the 2 part-time hires I'd added, buzzed around me with trays of Eliza's legacy cinnamon rolls. People cheered, music played, and for a brief, dazzling moment, it felt like the entire city had shown up. And my family was there, not at the center, not on a stage, but among the crowd. Dad shook hands with Marcus and ordered a second scone without criticism. Mom sipped wine and told her colleagues, "This is my daughter's place. It's become a real institution." Rosie snapped photos, yes, but she also laughed, genuinely, as she helped serve punch when the line grew too long. Tyler cornered me near the register, spreadsheets forgotten, to say quietly, "You proved us wrong, and I'm glad you did." For once, their presence didn't weigh on me. It didn't define me. They were part of the celebration, but not the source of it. They had been eclipsed, not by resentment, but by something greater, by the community that had chosen me when my family did not. As the evening drew to a close, I slipped away to Eliza's corner. I touched the framed photograph of her, whispering, "We did it." The hum of voices behind me was proof that she had been right all along. Love, made visible, would always outlast doubt. Later that night, as I walked home under the streetlights, a quiet realization settled over me. My family's betrayal, their absence on my opening day, their attempt to dismantle my dream, had once felt like the wound that would never heal. But now I understood. It was the fire that forged me. Their rejection forced me to stand on my own, to claim success on my terms. Sometimes we chase love in places it can't be found. Sometimes the people who should see us never do, but sometimes that pain pushes us toward the life we were meant to build, the family we were meant to find. And as I turned the key in my apartment door, tired but brimming with gratitude, I whispered to myself, I don't need to be chosen. I've already chosen myself. The bakery would continue to grow, evolve, change. My family would circle closer, maybe even learn how to love me in the language I'd needed all along. Or maybe they wouldn't. But either way, I had built something that no one could take away. Sweet Gatherings was more than a bakery now. It was proof. Proof that love, once visible, can never be unseen.